Order. Well, I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with a panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Joining me tonight, he is a former Green Party MP, human rights activist and blogger, Keith Locke, and he is a former Auckland mayoral candidate, thespian great and social commentator, one of the princes of the Auckland cultural community, Simon Prast. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, the Labour Party leadership battle. Who will win? Issue 2, 541 New Zealanders committed suicide last year. Why do we still lead in suicide statistics? What is hurting us as a people? And issue 3 tonight, according to a recent opinion poll, the majority of New Zealanders don't believe John Key. So why is he still sky high in the political polls? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word. But let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. It's finally happened. After months and 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 months of speculating about whether David Shearer could remain as leader of the Labour Party, he did the honourable thing and stepped down. The main contenders are Grant Robertson, Shane Jones and David Cunliffe. Who will win? Keith, why should Labour Party members put their faith into Grant Robertson when it was Grant's faction that empowered David Shearer for the last 20 months?
I think the most important thing is what the political differences are between them, and that's yet to be really clarified. It's true that David Cunliffe has given some strong speeches against the free market and strong pro-environment speeches.
Yep.
So he's seen in some circles as more the radical, but Grant Robertson himself, you know, on this program a couple of weeks ago, very strong against the GCSB bill, you know, and I find it a little hard to compare them because I've only seen Grant Robertson in opposition. I've seen David Cunliffe in government, and he wasn't terribly good as a minister in some respects. In some respects he was, driving through from some telecommunications changes. But he was a Minister of Immigration who refused
the Iranians, wasn't it?
Iranians and Ahmed Zawi.
That's right.
He was very bad on those issues and on the immigration laws at that time. So, and he's playing it a bit of both ways at the moment. A lot of left talk, plus he's saying, "Oh, I won't," or very unlikely to have Russell Norman as my finance minister. When that an MMP, that comes after the election. He shouldn't be dishing on the Greens at this point.
What does Labour need right now?
It needs, I think, something closer to the Greens in politics so that the two parties can work together with a radical economic policy, and some of, as I said, what David Cunliffe said is very good, but also they need to be strong in challenging the major institutions. One of Labour's problems is that it won't challenge the fundamental institutions of the economy, of the security services, and of the Defence Force. And there's a big challenge right now. Are they going to come out clearly against Britain and America bombing Syria? That'll be a test for them.
Are the Greens nervous at all if a strong candidate does win the leadership? A lot of talk, speculation. Greens have been doing so high because weak Labour Party, a stronger Labour Party. Fear that that number will come down?
Oh, I think if a stronger, more left Labour Party leader comes into power, that actually helps the Greens because it swings the whole spectrum a bit to the Greens to the left. And I think, given a choice, a lot of people, if the coalition, that is Labour Greens together, has credibility, a lot of people choose Greens.
Simon, why did David Shearer fail?
I think you have to be able to talk in politics. You have to be able to string ideas together in a fluent and convincing way. And Shearer had an excellent CV. He was a man of action, but I don't think he was a man of words. And in the House, you can really tell the difference between someone who can talk and it really doesn't matter what actually comes out of your mouth, as we see with the Prime Minister, but he has an ability to talk. And this is where I think that any of the candidates that Labour's putting up at the moment has got to be a vast improvement on David Shearer, because all of them are very good on their feet. Grant Robertson is an excellent debater.
That's right.
And I think he's been an excellent deputy. And for my money, I think that that's where he should stay and add a leader in David Cunliffe, who I think is, again, a very effective speaker and an advocate for the left. And I think that's what we're looking for.
What was the point, do you think, where Shearer went yeah, this is not for me. Where do you feel? What event was there anything, or was it just a shrug of the shoulders? You've had your time, move on.
Well, I think the moment when you're standing there in the House holding two snapper is probably the moment that, either this is going to, make my political fortune or not.
Yeah.
And I don't think it did. I also have to say it's the timing of Helen Clark being in this country as all of this is happening. I mean, you'd have to think that she perhaps had a bit of advice.
Well, I've heard many rumours that Helen was involved. You think she would have offered some advice to some of the candidates?
Well, I'm sure she had something to say to someone.
Yeah.
And whether or not that led to the events that we saw last week, we will never know.
Keith, the Green Party managed their leadership process with far more dignity and far less blood on the floor. How do they do that and Labour just seemed incapable of this?
Well, it's a very open process with the Greens. They just have candidates that go around the country. The delegates vote at the annual conference. Every year they have a leadership vote.
That's right,
and,
that's right.
It's hard to manipulate that or factionalise it or anything else. So it's fairly straightforward. Plus, none of the leaders have really been challenged in the Green Party. It was Rod Donald and Jeanette Fitzsimons. They resigned. A couple of others took their place, and there isn't any real challenges.
I understand, and this may be gossip, and you can tell me if it's true or not, but when you are applying to be a candidate for the Green Party, you're asked to rate your humbleness. Is it that lack of ego? Is it that lack of ego involved that actually makes the process a lot easier? That you're fighting for the idea and not the party.
I just can't quite remember that word, humbleness.
Right.
But there is a bit of a self-assessment process
Right, there is a
involved.
self-assessment process.
And the funny thing about the Greens is because, we're not an antagonistic
No,
group,
not at all.
If someone isn't performing very well, it's very hard to replace them because you don't like to be too critical.
Simon, what are the values that the next leader of the Labour Party needs to show members to become the leader?
Well, I think that National has really set out its agenda. And it couldn't be clearer about what National stands for. And I think that what Labour traditionally stood for is in many ways, the exact opposite of the agenda that National is pushing. Is that that people who are of means, who have wealth, who have job security, who have knowledge of the share market, these people don't need any more representation in Parliament. I think that Labour needs to get back to its roots and to speak for those people that don't have a voice. And I think that its ability to work with the Greens in opposition, to be able to do that and to be seen, to be able to work together, I think would be a very attractive thing for the electorate to see.
Final question to both of you on this. Who will be the next leader of the Labour Party? Let's hear your punt.
Probably Cunliffe, but see, I think that Robertson has the majority of the caucus.
Yeah, that's right.
So Cunliffe will have to get the majority of the members and the unions. It is possible, I think, to sort of support what Simon says, that in some ways to win the election, Cunliffe has the cut through to inspire the voters.
Yep.
But in terms of cooperative Prime Minister, possibly Robertson should be in that position. So that's the irony of the situation.
No. Simon, your punt?
Probably Cunliffe. I think he has cabinet experience, he has private sector experience. He went to the Kennedy School of Government, he's got an MPA from Harvard, he has diplomatic experience. So, and he comes from Auckland. And a third of the population lives there. I think, as I say, keep Grant Robertson in the deputy position and add another voice to the team. Cunliffe.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2 tonight. The government have attempted to spin the latest suicide statistics, with Todd McClay this week claiming that there had been a reduction in the suicide of young people aged between 15 and 24, and that suicides had dropped in Christchurch. That was the spin. The reality is Christchurch suicides paused post-quake, but have lifted to 81 for the region, above their normal 74 last year. The boasted reduction is actually only 6 less than the year previous, and these stats show the highest ever level of female suicides recorded and the highest level ever of 20 to 24-year-olds committing suicide. We know during Labour and National's step to the right in the 80s and 90s that our youth suicide rate doubled. Suicide is the social collateral damage of neoliberalism, and and economic dislocation, yet there seems to be no recognition in that from the government providing extra funding to those who must deal with this. Simon, why aren't we making real money available to take all the social consequences of this free market policy?
Well, suicide's an issue that we just don't really talk about in this country. I mean, it is a conspiracy of silence. My own personal experience of this when I was running for mayor, my uncle committed suicide. He was a builder who took a fall at work. He was unable to work. He went to ACC. They said, well, you've got a pre-existing condition. We won't pay you. He ended up in this protracted argy-bargy with ACC, ended up on a benefit, ended up without hope. And when there's no hope, then you make that choice. There's no positive spin on suicide. It's larger than the road toll. The way that it's reported, I must speak up for Maria Bradshaw, who works for Casper. She lost a son to suicide, and she's become a remarkable spokesperson for the cause. She says that the prevention strategy of the government's outdated. It refuses to update it. There are reporting restrictions, the most restrictive reporting regime in the West, in this country.
Why do you think it is that we as men have a real problem expressing that we get hurt in New Zealand society and go and seek actual help for that depression? What is it? Is it something about our staunchness, we've got to be tough men? What do you think it is?
Well, I mean, I feel very lucky. I mean, I have an arts background, but the country's national self-image is based on the All Blacks and sport, and as you say, staunchness. And being articulate with your feelings, or showing a soft side, or whatever, it's just, it's not something that we have any experience in or encourage. And I think that's why we see men resorting to violence, rather than seeking help or talking issues through. And I think it's peculiar to this country. It's one of the least attractive things of our national self-image.
Keith, these stats show an extra 17.6 suicides per year while National have been in government. Why, as a society, do we want to ignore suicide?
Yes, it is partly economic collapse, but it's also sort of structural change in society. You know, people are sometimes more isolated now. Their best friends are their computer, their smartphone and their TV, and if they start getting a bit depressed, they don't know where to go. They can't see any way out, and it's a two-sided thing. One, people don't know where to turn and haven't got the social supports, and on the other hand, the community is not attuned to recognising signs of people moving in that direction, and I think that's where the media sort of blackout is actually hurting us, is that a lot of people just don't know if someone's getting depressed. Keep an eye on them, because it's not just the suicides, it's the attempted suicides, about 3,000 a year, which is a huge number. And then after those attempts, there needs to be proper follow-up and support, and that's missing. You know, if I read the media, I don't really pick up any, what should I do if I suspect that somebody's suicidal? Where do I go? I don't know. Some of the best solutions are peers, that is, some people have been through and attempted suicide, and they've come right a bit, and they're starting up Facebook pages. There's the Nutters Club that Mike King
does great work there.
There's a play going round up the north, I think, called Matanui, sort of educating young Māori kids on it. That's good stuff.
Should we be concerned that this is showing the largest rate of female suicide that we've ever recorded?
Yes, I haven't got a particular explanation for that, but the suicide problem as a whole is bad, should be talked about much more openly. Question
of both of you. Our suicide rate is one of the highest in the developed world. In a country with so much, why are we not putting the resources in?
It's not a vote winner. It's not a glamorous issue. It reflects, I think, very badly on us as a society, and that's why we prefer to sweep it under the carpet of our mind. I think it's a very disturbing trend that it does, that there is a higher number of women, because I think that it does strike at the most vulnerable. And I think young women in this society in particular are at the bottom of the heap, if you like, and they are where the rubber meets the road in social and economic policy.
And there's glamour and celebrity sort of ranking, and people that end up the bottom of that lose self-confidence. Sometimes there's bullying by text and all the rest of it. So more of that possibly goes on amongst women than men.
Do we have our priorities right? I mean, this is our suicide toll is higher than the road toll, but you do not see the hundreds of millions that are poured into road safety, into mental health.
Yeah, well, that's true. And if you work through peer groups and people are doing Facebooks and working low cost, you don't need to put much money in. You just need to put it in the right places.
Question to both of you. Nothing, I think, shows the short-sightedness of mental health funding better than the John Kirwan Depression Hotline. The advertising was well funded, but the demand outstripped the ability to fund enough counsellors to answer the phones, leaving many not being able to get it through at all. I mean, are we funding mental health well enough?
No, not at all. I mean, again, it's not an issue that it raises more questions than it can possibly answer. And of course, the answer to the question is, I think, to do with the economic policy and the direction that the country is going in.
Yep.
And if you join those particular dots, then the conclusion that you come to is very, very unfortunate for the government. And its priorities, I think, are all askew here, and that's why we see these numbers.
Social dislocation, people not being able to feel connected in their society, economic issues. This is just collateral damage, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's collateral damage of the New Right revolution that's pushed people out onto the streets, increased the unemployment rate, and made people feel less part of a community. If you're in a society where people are looking after each other, you feel you're part of a community, you're less likely to commit suicide. That's been the damage done by the New Right revolution.
Where do you think the opposition needs to start putting genuine alternatives, general progress on this issue?
Yes, well,
What are the policies?
got
What could we see?
a lot more money into self-organising of people who've gone through some sort of mental health problem.
Yep.
There's a lot of really keen people there I've come across who've been through it, who've survived, who've said, I want to help other people. They don't need much resourcing, but just work, they can help develop the program. It's not just someone at the top developing or me coming up with a few ideas. They will develop the program and show where the money should be spent.
That's one of the things Maria Bradshaw was talking about in her thing, Casper, is that she has an adversarial relationship with the Ministry of Health, and they just don't want to hear what, and this woman has been through it, as you say. I mean, she's actually been through the situation, but they are just deaf to what she has to offer, and that's just madness.
Remarkable. Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. A recent opinion poll shows that a majority of New Zealanders do not fully believe what John Key says, yet he is still sky high in the political polls. Keith, the majority of New Zealanders don't believe the Prime Minister, yet they want him to run the country. Do we expect our politicians to be deceptive?
I don't think so. I think it's still that the people haven't really got confidence in the alternative, the Labour Green alternative yet. On individual issues, people are losing faith in the government, but an overall government, and it's partly the conservatism of the last Labour government as well, that they weren't really a change government nearly to the degree that I would have liked.
Yeah.
And so John Key can say, oh, well, Helen Clark had this GCSB legislation, supported the spy service. Helen Clark sent off troops to Afghanistan. Helen Clark had this law and Phil Goff, the law and order campaign, putting more people in prison. So, what's the difference? And why not stick with Happy John? At least, you got a smiley face.
It's remarkable after half a decade it's still Helen Clark's problem and fault though, isn't it?
Yeah,
isn't it?
It is. And I'm not excusing anything, but I think that's part of the psychology of people. Unless they're convinced the Labour Green alternative will be
Could
better,
actually work. Right.
Stay with... and the media is very tough on... the left. You just see it with the power proposal that Labour and the Greens came out. Everyone, the media commentators by and large jumped on it. Russell Norman talks about very limited quantitative easing that's done in all around the world.
Printing money in Zimbabwe.
Printing money and all the rest of it. So it's...
And you've certainly seen that recently, haven't you, with the candidates needing taxpayer funding to go around the country for their challenge. That's been heavily criticised. Not much criticism, though, the $30 million corporate welfare to Rio Tinto. You're right. It's very different when the left does something and when the right do it. Simon, do we want a Machiavellian genius as Prime Minister, or do we want honest bloke down pub?
I agree with Keith that I think that the numbers that we see at the moment are more or as much a reflection of the opposition not being as powerful or as cohesive as it needs to be. The particular poll that you're talking about came up with some extraordinary, almost results at cross purposes, that most people think he's getting worse. Most people don't believe him. It's touch and go whether most people trust him to run the country, but he's strong and effective.
Yes!
And so you come to the conclusion that he's a strong and effective liar who's getting worse at his job to the extent that I'm in two minds as to whether I trust him to run the country anymore. So, I mean...
But we do like something of the Shakespearean king, don't we? We understand that the leader is going to be vicious at times, kind at others. Do we expect our leaders to be a bit... to not actually tell us the truth sometimes?
Well, I guess a level of cynicism does prevail in politics, but I mean, there comes a point where, for example, Russell Norman got up in the House yesterday and interrogated the Prime Minister, who just gave monosyllabic answers, yes, 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 to a series of questions.
Yes.
I mean, you wonder what the hell you pay the man for.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is called question time, you know?
Yeah, it was the same with the questioning on the NSA funding the GCSB. Yeah, the Prime Minister just refused to answer, but the media didn't really take him to task for that, and that's a critical issue. Is the NSA funding the GCSB the way it's funding the British counterpart? Is there an NSA desk at the GCSB office the way the WikiLeaks papers have exposed was likely to have been a few years back? All of these are very fundamental questions as to whether we're dependent on America for intelligence or whether we've got a foreign government, you know, helping our budget. You know, that could be a bit dangerous.
And it's a matter of actual fact as well. Either this is happening or it's not happening. And I mean, the whole thing about the GCSB bill that got me is that either all of these people are wrong, the Law Society, the Human Rights Commission, the Privacy Commission, all of these experts are wrong, or they're not. There's no halfway.
Yeah, there's no grey, is there?
No,
It's black or white.
not at all.
One person's either completely wrong,
That's right.
or the other person's
That's
completely
right.
wrong. Question to both of you: when does this credibility gap start to hurt, Keith?
Well, maybe if there's a more effective Labor leader and there's a good synchronicity between Labor and the Greens, and because some of the right-wing commentators are saying, well, the first thing a new Labor leader's got to do is bash the Greens.
That's
or
right.
slap them down.
Well,
you
I think anything Matthew
this is the
Hooton has to say at
anti-radical
this time, that's right.
stuff. But if there's that, you know, they can be a effective government with all the best points of both parties, then I think the public might drift back. It's still about 50-50 if you look at Labor Greens versus National. It's not as if National's way ahead of Labor Greens.
When does the credibility gap start to hurt, Keith?
I don't think he made many friends in the media recently.
Right.
And I mean, he has had a very long honeymoon. And it's quite a long way until the next election. And, you know, you see like with Judith Collins and Ann Tolley with their emails being, you know, cracked into and all this sort of thing. The wonderful cohesive blue that we've seen, I think that, you know, the chinks will start to show. And I don't think that he will get the, you know, the gaga, you know, media treatment that he's had up until now. And he will have to answer questions and answer them truthfully. And this is what we look for in the media. I mean, with John Campbell, as I'll talk about a bit later on, I mean, he told untruths. He spoke a lie. And I mean, there's spin, and then there's a lie. And to hold him to account, I think, is one of the things that the media really needs to pick up on now.
Final question to both of you then. When is a lie a lie? I mean, I found that interview fascinating and a little bit terrifying, because it seemed that the Prime Minister was just going to say, no, it's fine, even though the body of evidence clearly says it's not. When will the New Zealand populace, the populace point to things he says, no, that's clearly lying? What's the point? What does the evidence need to be?
Yeah, well, of course, then they say, oh, I was improperly briefed or something like that. Whether it's a lie or improper briefing, whether it's incompetence or lying, I don't really care.
Right.
It's still introducing legislation that's so much against our interests. And what do we hear today? That our Facebooks are being...
119 people, this 6 months of this year, 119 people have been asked by the New Zealand government to Facebook to give details about their accounts. Yeah,
well, that shows something rather spooky going on, doesn't it? if you add that to the requests to Google and the requests to the other agencies that we know the NSA gets information from, that issue's going to keep going. And I don't think the Prime Minister can just say, I'm not going to answer, it's a national security matter for too long.
When's a lie a lie?
Well, I really couldn't hear many more lies. You know, I've heard from Key, and it's just not acceptable to answer monosyllabically, as I say, or to say something at prime time on national television that is either poorly briefed or, more to the point, not true.
Yeah.
You know, that is what you call a lie.
Let's wrap the show with the final word. Keith, your final word this week is?
Well, I think it's important that we all stand up against the US and British Air Forces bombing the hell out of Syria. There's absolutely no good outcome to that, and it just seems to be those two countries and other Western countries showing who's boss, bashing another country after Afghanistan and Iraq and all the rest. And it's not going to hasten the downfall of the Assad regime. If the Assad regime was silly enough to continue to use those weapons, chemical weapons, it would fall very quickly anyhow, lose any support from Russia, etc. There's a peaceful solution. Military solutions are not on.
Simon, your final word this week?
Well, we've just been talking about what is a lie, and I want to talk about truth in television. And Amy Adams was just on Q&A this last weekend talking about the TICS, the Telecommunications Interception Capability and Security Bill. And Vikram Kumar, former State Services Commission Strategy and Innovation Manager, CEO of Internet New Zealand, had a few things to say about this in that left-wing rag, the NBR,
Yes.
which I'd like to just talk to you here about, no back doors. And Mr. Kumar says, the Minister several times clearly and forcefully asserted that the TICS bill will not lead to the creation of back doors. To say that I was astounded is an understatement. The whole point of the TICS bill is to lawfully create back doors, or more precisely, to continue those already in the telco networks and in future force creation and select service providers' systems. There's a difference between spin and a bald-faced lie, and this government can't tell the difference.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Keith. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, I have to admit to being genuinely surprised by the wave of social media criticism targeted Stephanie Key's art for nothing more than being John Key's daughter. Stephanie is a young woman whose dignity and worth shouldn't be so gleefully stamped upon with such unwarranted moral high ground. Our dislike and contempt for the policies of her father have nothing to do with her, and it is graceless of us to attach that. Let us refocus our energies and passions at worthier foes where we have legitimate grievance and righteous anger. I think Stephanie's cross-culture consumption hipster design art is clever and smart. The day we start considering 20-year-old girls being creative as the enemy is the day the Taliban win. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whanau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand